production assistant. She was his right-hand person in all things.
It wasn't like she told the band what to play or what notes to play. She didn't know anything about music. She'd say, well, it sounds funny right there. Well, okay, is it flat or sharp, you know?
I'd go over to the studio where they were recording, and she'd be taking notes and making sure that every person who was on the session was notated, and who played steel, who played drums, who did the guitar work, who sang the backup vocal. I mean, just every little detail about the session, she knew it. She was there and she paid attention.
In 1987, 3 years after his divorce from Mickey, Conway married Dee.
We thought, there is no way. That is so out of character for our father to be involved with a woman that had been a friend of mine. Our father knew that we were all upset, and he knew that we had hopes that our parents would eventually find their way back together.
But in Robert Orman's view, Conway's marriage to Dee was the result of true love.
I know that Conway did love Dee. I mean, that you can't be with somebody 24/7 as they were and not be totally into each other. You never saw one without the other. It truly was the love of his life, I believe.
Despite their wounded feelings, Conway's children come to accept the new marriage.
I wrote him a letter, and it was very personal, but I told him that how much I loved him, and that if he loved her, there's certainly some place that I could find to love her.
Now, in the wake of Conway's death, this uneasy truce begins to crack. The executors, Hugh Carden and Don Garris, halt the regular salaries that Conway had doled out to his children while he was alive.
Hugh Carden said your dad didn't have any money. We don't have any money to pay anybody anything. And I said, you're lying. You're lying to me. And he said, no. And so I just went home and collapsed into a pile of tears.
The executors explain that Twitty City has no cash with which to pay Conway's children, and they say that to pay them out of the estate funds would mean distributing their inheritance before the estate is settled. Meanwhile, the executors hired Dee as a consultant to carry on negotiations with record companies on behalf of the estate.
Dee Jenkins knows her way around the country music business, and that's always the way she came off to me, as a real, true music business professional.
But Conway's children struggle to understand the new working relationship between Dee and the executors.
Hugh Carden and Dee Henry did not even speak. I mean, it was very, very strained, the relationship. And now they were sitting side by side.
Conway's children feel increasingly excluded from the process of settling their father's estate. They prepare to fight back.
Dad said, you know, in my will there's a provision that if the majority of my heirs want to remove the executors, you will have the power and you will replace them.
After an abdominal aneurysm kills famed country star Conway Twitty in 1993, tensions build between his 4 adult children and their stepmother over the distribution of the singer's $15 million estate. The understanding between Dee and Conway's children is coming undone. Citing lack of funds, the executors have halted the salaries that Conway paid his children when he was alive. Kathy attempts to challenge the executors' decision, but to no avail.
Hugh Carden looked at me and said, you don't have any control here. I'm the executor. And I'm okay. And so I said, well, okay. And that was my first little inkling of, uh-oh.
At around the same time that the executors cut Conway's children off from their incomes, they hired Dee to work as a consultant for the estate. As Kathy's frustrations grow over what she sees as an alliance between Dee and the executors, she remembers a conversation with her father.
I'd known Carden all my life, and Dad had known him most of his. And he said, don't you trust him? And I said, I don't know that I do, Dad. And he said, in my will, there's a provision that if you, the majority of my heirs, want to remove the executors, you will have the power.
Kathy decides that the time has come to use that power.
A few months after Dad's death, I filed through the courts to have the executors removed.
Conway Twitty's children were very insistent that the will be followed to the letter because it left everything to them and left nothing to Dee. But at the same time, they didn't like the way the executors were following the law because the law said that Dee was allowed to inherit. So they wanted to ignore the part of the will which appointed the executors, but at the same time say, no, that will is very important and you've got to follow every word of it. When it went to a court, the judge didn't agree and said the executors get to stay.
In February of 1994, the probate court rejects the motion to dismiss Carden and Garris. They will remain as executors of the estate. And frustration continues to build. In April of 1994, nearly a year after Twitty's death, Dee opens the newspaper, The Tennessean, and is flabbergasted by what she sees. Kathy has gone to the press. In a newspaper article about the estate, Kathy says that Dee should be satisfied with what she already has, including the $1.8 million home she shared with Conway, as well as $900,000 in life insurance benefits.
We jumped up and bopped him in the nose. We refused to just lay down. We refused to stop.
There was no way that Dee could have continued negotiating with Kathy after she read what Kathy had said. From a negotiating standpoint, their position is very clear because the only one to negotiate with somebody who's actually negotiating back in good faith.
In fact, Dee is so incensed by the article that she immediately informs the executors that she is breaking off all negotiations concerning the division of the estate with Conway's children. She wants the estate to be liquidated immediately. Since Dee refuses to negotiate, the executors feel they have no choice but to agree to her demand. In June of 1994, the courts agree and order an auction to liquidate Conway Twitty's estate. To help prepare for the auction, the executors hire Dee to help them catalog the items that are to be put up for sale.
And she really was the best living person to do so because she'd worked with Conway Twitty for about 20 years. She intimately knew everything about all of these items.
They allowed her to become employed by the estate, while at the same time prohibiting the children from even coming to the office.
This latest arrangement between Dee and the executors is too much for Conway's children. On July 27, 1994, Joni spots Dee's car at the Twitty City offices.
They were loading things in Dee's trunk. What was in the boxes, I don't know. So off we went to the office and confronted Carden, and he told us it was none of our business. He told us to stay out of it.
But in the petition that the executors would file a short time later, they alleged that Kathy yelled at Hugh Carden that Dee had no right to be there and demanded that she be kicked off the premises, adding that Hugh and Don had no right to sell off the estate. The executors request that the courts grant a restraining order against Kathy and Joni, preventing them from entering the offices of Twitty City.
The children were wanting to know what was going on, and their interest was not welcomed. And so the way that was stopped was through a restraining order. It's unheard of.
It's very rare that a court will grant a restraining order because what that does is it tells people they're not allowed to do what they normally would be allowed to do. But here the court was convinced that Joni and Kathy's behavior was so bad towards the executors that they had to be ordered by the court to leave them alone and let them do their job. And that's what the court did.
The request for a restraining order is granted. Twitty City itself is put up for sale and soon sells for close to $3 million. In advance of the auction, everybody is told that they must move out by August 31st of 1994.
The children's homes were there on the grounds, and they had to leave. So a year after their father's death, not only were they still dealing with the sadness and the grief grieving process of losing their father. They were dealing with his property being sold, their homes being uprooted, and they had to go find other places to live. It was a really hard thing.
Overwhelmed by the loss of her home, Joni moves to a suburb of Nashville. Here, she makes a new and valuable friend.
My first home outside of Twitty City was right next door to Brenda. Had no idea who she was.
I lived next door to Joni after they were forced to leave Twitty City when that was sold. Joni moved in next door to me. I would get up at night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would see her sitting at her kitchen table crying.
But it would be years before Brenda would end up representing Joni and Kathy. In the meantime, Kathy and Joni continue to battle the executors every inch of the way.
We were fighting to stop the auction. My sister and I laid down $100,000 plus to stop the auction, and we were determined.
Soon, the potential sale of Conway's belongings sparks outrage from an unexpected source.
She said, "This is mine. This is my mail. They can't sell my mail."
And a surprising request infuriates the public.
They started reporting that she had filed this petition to disinter his body and to cremate it.
After an abdominal aneurysm kills famed country music star Conway Twitty in 1993, negotiations between his 4 adult children and their stepmother over his $15 million estate break down, setting the stage for a massive auction of his worldly goods. Conway Twitty's daughters Kathy and Joni spend a small fortune trying to stop the auction from taking place, but all their efforts come to nothing.
Kathy and I, we fought up until the day of the auction trying to stop it. And it finally came to us that this wasn't going to stop. It was going to take place.
Finally, in October of 1994, everything has been cataloged.
We couldn't believe it. Everything, our baby pictures, Mother and Daddy's love letters, Mother and Daddy's divorce papers, Daddy's, our gifts from the band, gifts from us.
Over the course of 3 days, fans show up for the auction at Twitty City to bid on everything from canceled checks, gold records, and vintage guitars to a 1956 celery green Thunderbird and Conway's rhinestone-studded suits.
It was almost as hard as losing our dad again. These things that were a picture of his life.
The executors tried to be nice guys and thought that perhaps the kids and Dee might actually have certain memorabilia that they wanted. So what they did was they gave the kids about $50,000 each and Dee about $100,000 so that they could purchase whatever items had significant personal value to them.
When it came time for our Mother and Daddy's marriage and divorce papers to be auctioned, Kathy and I, for the first time, stood up with our little paddle and said $100. And to the credit of the auctioneer, he said so. He didn't give anyone else a chance to say a word.
And there are others who are sympathetic to Joni and Kathy's cause.
This good friend of ours, Jay Jackson, came up and he laid 3 $100 bills in my hand. And he said, "There's no way you're going to buy that. That belongs to you." It meant a lot to us that somebody cared that much for Dad, that they would see to it, that his children were so suffering so much. Sorry, it's really an emotional thing. But it was a hard day. It felt like Daddy dying again.
Joni and Kathy aren't the only ones trying to preserve what they can of their parents' relationship. Their mother, Mickey, has also made an appearance. Nobody is more surprised than her to see some of the items up for auction.
Mickey saw that the love letters that Conway had written to her were there at the auction.
She said, "That's my mail. How can they sell my mail?" And she went over there.